My name's Alan Stokes. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Future Family Limited, and we provide stem cell insurance treatment to parents and families. So we don't store cells ourselves, but if they store them and then need to take those cells out of storage for treatment, then we provide an insurance that enables them to go and get what their child then needs to look after them.
Mm-hmm. And how have you noticed the market for these kinds of products change over the last few years?
Yes, well, there's a definite move actually, which is previously we could see that the market was really what we would call a medical expenses market, which meant that an issue occurred, the child would be put into hospital, it would cause a cost, and the insurers would pay the medical expenses. When we spoke to biobanks and their customers about that, they felt they weren't certain that they really trusted that process as well as they might, and so we're adopting a different approach. And it's just simply that we give the family the cash. So the point at which we're told there's a valid claim, and we have a particular mechanism for doing that, which is independent of the insurers and of ourselves, then we pay the full amount of the claim directly to the family, so that they can then choose which country they go to, which hospital they go to, which consultants they use, based on the best that's available in the world at that point in time.
So that sounds very different to previous models for sort of existing conventional treatments.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, and it's met with a very warm response from the biobanks actually, because insurers sometimes have a certain reputation of the small print, and so we've changed that. And I guess the key way that we've built trust is we've built an independent panel of medical experts drawn from the stem cell community right around the world, so that if anybody ever has a claim, it goes to that panel for review, and that panel say yes, no, should be paid. If it's to be paid, then that's the point at which we pay the full sum insured, every pound, every penny of it, over to the family, so they can decide what they do with it from that point onwards.
Interesting. So, sort of thinking about general sort of advanced therapies as they have become known, what are some of the challenges in coming up with coverage plans for them?
Yes, yeah. Well, we've, I guess our biggest challenge actually is just educating people. It's having them understand that, not understand, but be aware really of what's possible. And I think in the community at large, we need more midwives, more doctors, more consultants, more everybody talking about what stem cells are, how they work, what's not appropriate just now, so that as this whole environment builds going forward, people have a really good understanding. And I say that because we currently cover about 80 standard conditions. So they're typically HSCT type scenarios, blood-related diseases, which is fine. But there's an enormous amount of wonderful research that's going on, clinical trials and so on. So autism, cerebral palsy, these sorts of things. And so one of the really interesting challenges for us is how do we build those sorts of conditions into our cover, so that as knowledge and research and capability for treatment starts to improve over time, that we're in parallel and in sync with that. And so for that reason we have an annual renewal on our policy, so that every year we renew it, and our independent panel help us then make sure that any new treatments get added to the cover.
Mm-hmm. And how do you what do you do to work with patients to make sure that they're fully aware of the range of treatments, and also to get access to these treatments?
Yeah, so in conversation with biobanks who clearly deal with patients at this very difficult, traumatic time very often for them, their view was, don't try and do too much as the insurers, and that actually the important thing is to give the family the cash. And so whilst we have huge resources available to us to help for those that actually need it, what we find is that most of the feedback we have is we'd like to start the conversation with the people we already know and trust in the medical and clinical community. So, a child or indeed an adult who's been having treatment has usually gone through a process before they get to need stem cell treatment. And so they know medics. They've had a range of appointments with different people, gone for tests, have gone into various places. So we want to try and build on that by allowing that trust to be maintained, but still giving them the cash, so that the point at which they're given the advice which says, okay, go to the US to do this, go to Switzerland, whatever the advice is, that we can help them go and achieve that.
Mm-hmm. And is it mostly cord blood that's being banked in the biobanks that you work with, do you know?
Indeed, yes. Almost exclusively cord blood at this point in time. We're very interested in the other developments that are taking place there. But there's a time and a place for that. There's an evolution within the insurance market that needs to keep pace with that. And we're learning all the time. So every new biobank that we work with or we talk with give us their data, share with us what's going on in their marketplace, and so we're then ever better prepared for the next stage of development.
And have you noticed more and more people making use of these biobanks?
Absolutely, and it's a real trend which we've noticed from an insurance perspective is the way that what used to be almost exclusively a high net worth environment, the costs are falling quite dramatically, and so more middle income families are starting to look at this whole area of stem cell storage, and it's important that they do because it's a really great thing to do. However, it comes with an issue, which is what if then they need to use those cells for treatment and don't have the cash to do it? And that's a really important trend for us, and one we're keeping a very close eye on, because as costs fall in the marketplace, more and more people who are in middle income families typically want to do this. They need to be aware of the implications of the treatment and the cost of treatment. So one of the things that we're able to do is to help that whole community and help the biobanks by saying, if you have people in that situation where they want to store but don't have the money themselves to treat, well, we can help provide an insurance that will reflect that and enable them to do exactly that.
And I guess, but on the completely other end of the spectrum, it was Leerink recently sort of made the claim that we may have a treatment over $1 million. How's that going to affect how you work with biobanks, with patients, with insurers?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's all a question of the numbers. I mean, it's very simple. So if you have 5 times the cost, you need 5 times the premium to cover the cost. It is as simple as that. Our generic model is one of, we take a little bit of premium off of an awful lot of people, and then a very few people need an awful lot of money. So that's the process that we do. We take it from everyone and we give it to the few who really do need it. $1 million's a big number, I don't think for blood-related diseases that's very likely. I think that's for some of the new things that are coming through, and that's why we need to be very careful that we create the right expectation amongst the public, amongst the biobanks, and within the insurance community of what we're doing and how we're evolving it. So when each year we look at our cover, if we're going to add in cerebral palsy as an example, then we will be very certain as to what the cost combination of that is, because absolutely clearly, we won't be providing cover unless we can really look after people. So we want that IPME to be able to say, yes, pay them the money, and whether it's 100,000 or $1 million, we want to be able to give them the money.
So obviously, methods and sort of the process of reimbursement and availability of treatment varies around the world. Have you noticed any differences with dealing with insurers and biobanks in different countries?
Yes, that's a really interesting question. So we've been involved with biobanks in many different countries, Hong Kong, Singapore, the US, Mexico, continent of Europe, Eastern Europe, and they do have a different style country to country. So we're working with some people in Russia currently, which is a very fascinating sort of example, particularly with sort of the global political scenario at the moment. So we're working really hard with them to make sure that we do look after people in the way that they want to. Sometimes the differences are around legal and regulatory issues, so what you can and cannot do and how you communicate to individuals as part of that. Sometimes, in some markets, a lower level of cover is more prevalent. They do more things locally than they would in other locations. And then there are locations where it's illegal even to insure stem cell treatment, or indeed the government may provide that, or the private medical environment may provide it. So yes, it's one really interesting part of my role is to properly understand what's going on in each individual country and make sure that we reflect that appropriately through our insurance.
And is it sort of helpful to come to events like these to sort of to really understand the whole ecosystem of advanced therapies?
It's terrific because I'm a dyed-in-the-wool insurance chap, so that's been my history. So I understand a bit about that, but not about the science and the technology and the manufacture that goes into some of these very discrete processes that are going on. So it's already been great. We've had lots of meetings and we're booked for some more to be able to understand really how this whole community comes together, really, both to extract all of the right cells in the first place and then look after them really carefully for a lifetime, really. And then there we are, ready for when we're needed to do our bit and support people when they need us most.
Absolutely. So what do you think is the future of how these therapies are paid for and administered to patients, or delivered to patients, I should say?
Yeah. Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I find people talk to me about maybe more public banks, more private banks. I think the future will come from the education of all those pregnant mums and existing mums as to what do we really want, as a society and in a community. And so some governments talk to us and say, actually, we think the future is stem cell therapy. Why would we spend our time and money on a lot of the current cancer treatments, for example, when actually we could use stem cell? So I think stem cells will become ubiquitous. I think a generation or two ahead, it will become the way that people are looked after when they're unwell, and it will be a very efficient, very cost-effective process. And I think we'll see more government capability around that as well. So whilst I'd love insurance to be part of that, I'd also like them to come to the table and help us make sure that it really is ubiquitous, because I think that will be good for everybody.
Fantastic. Well, Alan, thanks so much for joining me here at the World Advanced Therapies and Regenerative Medicine Congress.
No problem at all. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.